Chapter 1: The Professional Boundary. Emma watched her client's shoulders soften, the tension finally releasing after their 50-minute session. Mrs. Henderson's hands, which had twisted anxiously in her lap when she'd first arrived, now rested calmly on her knees. Progress, Emma noted mentally, adding it to the catalogue of subtle improvements she'd observed over their 8 weeks together. The wall clock ticked toward the hour mark, precisely on time as always. "I never thought I'd be able to go into the grocery store without feeling like I might collapse," Mrs. Henderson said, smiling with the hesitant pride of someone still adjusting to their own capabilities. "My husband couldn't believe I went alone yesterday." Emma returned the smile, professional warmth carefully calibrated, enough to convey genuine pleasure at her client's progress, not so much that it might blur the boundaries between therapist and friend. "The exposure techniques are working well for you. Remember to use your breathing exercises if you feel the anxiety starting to build." Mrs. Henderson nodded, gathering her purse as the clock struck 4. Emma rose from her chair in one fluid motion, extending her hand for their customary end-of-session handshake. "Same time next week?" After showing her client out, Emma closed the door with a soft click and allowed herself a moment of stillness. The late afternoon sun slanted through her office blinds, casting golden bars across the polished hardwood floor. She inhaled deeply, savoring the faint scent of the lavender oil she diffused between sessions, a small ritual that helped clear the emotional residue from one client before welcoming another. She moved to her desk and gathered Mrs. Henderson's session notes, her pen moving in neat, precise script as she added her observations. Emma's handwriting had been described by colleagues as unusually uniform, each letter formed with the same care she applied to maintaining the boundaries in her therapeutic relationships. She noted the breakthrough with the grocery store, the reduced physical symptoms, the improved sleep patterns, all promising indicators that the treatment plan was working. The office around her reflected the same measured approach she brought to her practice. Walls painted in a soothing sage green provided a calming backdrop for carefully selected artwork, abstract pieces in muted blues and grays that clients could interpret according to their own emotional landscapes. A single photograph in a silver frame stood on her desk, angled so that only Emma could see it, her grandmother standing before a lighthouse, face tilted toward the sun. Beside it, a small potted peace lily thrived despite the limited natural light, its white blooms a testament to Emma's consistent care. Everything in the room served a purpose. The comfortable but supportive chairs positioned at a precise angle, close enough for connection, far enough for psychological safety. The bookshelf stocked with carefully curated texts on therapeutic approaches. Even the tissue box, disguised in a handcrafted wooden holder, was positioned within easy reach of clients but never prominently displayed, available without suggesting expectation. Emma straightened the already aligned pens in their holder and adjusted the framed psychology license on the wall, though it hadn't been askew. These small adjustments to her environment provided a sense of control that she found comforting after sessions where she held space for others' chaos. The sudden ring of her phone interrupted her routine. Emma checked the caller ID and felt a subtle tightening between her shoulder blades. Dr. Claire Donovan, her occasional supervisor, and the most prominent psychologist in their small New England town. "Dr. Cole speaking," she answered, her voice composed. "Emma, it's Claire." The older woman's crisp tone came through clearly. "I have a potential referral for you, though I'm not entirely convinced it's appropriate." Emma settled into her chair, recognizing the familiar prelude to Claire's particular brand of professional skepticism. "What's the situation?" "A young woman, early 30s, graphic designer. She's been experiencing persistent dreams and what she describes as memories of a past life. Specifically, Paris in the 1800s. Claire's tone carried a barely concealed note of dismissal. "She's requesting past life regression therapy." "I see." Emma kept her voice neutral, though she felt a familiar tension building. Claire's views on hypnotherapy and regression work were well known in their professional circle. "You know my position on these methods," Claire continued. "The risk of false memory creation, the lack of empirical evidence. The substantial body of case studies and qualitative research suggesting therapeutic benefit," Emma interjected gently. "And my certification in clinical hypnotherapy." A slight pause followed. The silence waited with professional disagreement. "I'm concerned about reinforcing potentially delusional thinking," Claire finally said. Emma traced the edge of her notepad with one finger, choosing her next words carefully. "I understand your concern. But exploration of these experiences, whether they're actual memories or symbolic manifestations of unconscious material, can provide significant therapeutic insight. My approach is methodical and grounded in established psychological principles." The sound conveyed volumes of academic skepticism. "Well, she specifically requested this approach, and you're the only qualified practitioner in the area. I've already discussed the limitations and potential risks with her." "I'm sure you have," Emma replied, managing to keep the dryness from her tone. "Would you like to send me her information?" "Yes, though I want to be clear that I'm documenting my reservations about this treatment modality." Emma suppressed a sigh. "Noted. As always, I appreciate your candor, Claire." After arranging the referral details, Emma ended the call and placed her phone face down on the desk. Claire's disapproval was nothing new. The older psychologist approached anything outside traditional cognitive behavioral methods with the same wariness others might reserve for experimental pharmaceuticals. Still, something about this particular case caught Emma's attention. Dreams of Paris in the 1800s, specific enough to suggest more than random dream content. She opened her calendar to find an opening for the new client, curiosity stirring beneath her professional interest. Emma added the appointment to her schedule, writing the name in her appointment book with characteristic precision: Kate Thompson, initial consultation. She closed the book and aligned it perfectly with the edge of her desk, a small action that gave her satisfaction. Tomorrow would bring a new client with an unusual concern, but today's work was complete. Each session conducted, each note written, each moment accounted for, just as she preferred it. The vintage room was already half full when Emma pushed through its heavy wooden door at precisely 7 o'clock. Jazz notes curled through the dimly lit space, wrapping around conversations and clinking glasses. She spotted Margot immediately, her friend's auburn bob catching the light from the small candle flickering on their usual corner table. Emma felt the day's professional veneer begin to soften, though not entirely dissolve, as she navigated between tables toward the one person who had known her long enough to see past most of her carefully constructed walls. "There she is," Margot called, already halfway through a glass of Merlot. Her smile crinkled the corners of her eyes, genuine warmth that had been consistent since their graduate school days. "I was about to send a search party, or at least drink your wine myself." "I'm exactly on time," Emma said, sliding into the booth opposite her friend. The leather seat was worn in a way that suggested comfort rather than neglect, like everything else in this place they'd been meeting at monthly for years. "Which for normal people means you're early." Margot pushed a second glass of wine across the table. "I ordered for you. The Cabernet you liked last time." Emma accepted the glass with a grateful nod, appreciating how Margot remembered such details without making a production of it. She took a small sip, letting the rich, earthy notes settle on her tongue before swallowing. It was perfect, just bitter enough to feel sophisticated without being unpleasant. Like their friendship, she thought. "So," Margot leaned forward, elbows on the table in a way that would have horrified her proper New England mother, "tell me about the anxious grocery shopper. Any progress?" Emma smiled despite herself. Margot always asked about her clients, with a mix of genuine interest and gentle teasing about Emma's methodical approach to therapy. Actually, yes. She went shopping alone yesterday. First time in months. Your exposure techniques working their magic again. Margot raised her glass in a small toast. Meanwhile, I had a patient today who swore his hamstring pain was caused by his wife's negative energy. Tried to convince me that massage therapy could exorcise her influence from his muscle tissue. Emma laughed, a genuine sound that she realized didn't emerge often enough. What did you tell him? That I specialized in physical therapy, not marital counseling or exorcisms, but I'd be happy to refer him to both. Margot's green eyes danced with mischief. Though I did suggest that carrying his own groceries instead of making his wife do it might help with both problems. Their conversation flowed easily through appetizers, warm artichoke dip that they'd ordered so many times the server brought it without asking. Margot dominated the dialogue with stories from her physical therapy practice and updates on mutual acquaintances. Emma contributed her own carefully edited anecdotes, finding comfort in their familiar rhythm. Did you hear Mayor Grant is pushing that new historical preservation ordinance? Margot asked, tearing a piece of bread in half. Jonah from the university is furious, says it's just her way of preventing the rainbow crosswalk the LGBTQ student group proposed. Emma made an appropriate noise of interest, though local politics rarely engaged her. She preferred problems she could address directly through her practice, with clear boundaries and measurable outcomes. Their entrees arrived, salmon for Emma, risotto for Margot, and they settled into comfortable silence for a few bites. Emma noticed the way the candlelight softened the fine lines beginning to form around her friend's eyes. They were approaching 40 from different directions, Margot embracing it with characteristic enthusiasm, Emma pretending time was a patient she could keep waiting in the lobby indefinitely. So, Margot said finally, setting down her fork with deliberate care. Any interesting prospects lately? The question landed between them, like an uninvited guest. Emma concentrated on cutting her salmon into a perfectly symmetrical piece. Unless you mean prospects for office space when my lease is up next year, then no. Emma. Margot's voice carried both affection and exasperation. It's been 2 years since Theo. 2 years of you focusing on your practice and not having time for dating. My practice does require focus, Emma replied, keeping her voice even. And emotional energy that I don't necessarily have left over at the end of the day. You help people navigate their emotional lives all day, but somehow can't find space for one of your own? Margot reached across the table, her fingers warm as they covered Emma's hand. You can't hide behind your clients forever. Emma felt herself withdrawing, not just her hand that slipped away on the pretense of reaching for her wine, but something deeper. The familiar retreat inside herself, where feelings could be observed clinically rather than experienced. It was the same instinct that had ultimately ended things with Theo, his persistent attempts to breach walls she hadn't even recognized she'd built. I'm not hiding, she said finally. I'm being practical. Dating requires an emotional vulnerability that isn't compatible with maintaining appropriate therapeutic boundaries for my clients. Margot's expression softened into something dangerously close to pity. That's the most clinical description of fear I've ever heard. It's not fear, it's... Emma stopped, recognizing the defensive note in her voice. She took a deliberate breath. Can we talk about something else? Like how your marathon training is going? A beat of silence stretched between them, laden with everything Margot wanted to say and everything Emma refused to hear. Then Margot's shoulders relaxed, accepting the diversion with grace Emma knew she didn't deserve. I've added another mile to my long runs, Margot said, allowing the change of subject. My knees hate me, but my mind loves the endorphins. They finished their meals with lighter conversation, though Emma caught Margot watching her with concerned glances when she thought Emma wouldn't notice. It created a gentle ache in her chest, the the knowledge that she was loved so thoroughly by someone who saw both her strength and her cowardice. When the bill arrived, they fell into their usual mock argument about who would pay. "My turn," Emma insisted, sliding her credit card into the leather folder. "Fine, but I'm leaving the tip." Margot added cash to the table. "Considerate payment for listening to me complain about that hypochondriac with the tennis elbow who comes in every week." Outside the restaurant, the spring evening had turned cooler. Street lamps cast pools of golden light onto the cobblestone sidewalk, and somewhere nearby a saxophone player practiced a melancholy tune that seemed to follow them down the street. "Oh, before I forget," Margot said, turning to face Emma as they prepared to part ways. "My colleague David, the one I mentioned last month, he's finally divorced. Smart kind, reads actual books." She raised her eyebrows meaningfully. "Would you at least consider meeting him? Just coffee?" Emma sighed, recognizing the stubborn set of Margot's jaw. "I'll consider it. That's all I'm promising. That's all I'm asking." Margot pulled her into a hug, warm and solid. "Well, for now anyway." Emma returned the embrace, allowing herself to lean in briefly before stepping back. "Good night, Margot." "Good night, Em. Text me when you get home." As they turned in opposite directions, Emma felt the weight of Margot's concern following her down the street. Her friend's words echoed uncomfortably, "You can't hide behind your clients forever." She quickened her pace, as though she could outrun the truth in the statement, the sharp edge of recognition that Margot had handed her like a mirror she wasn't ready to look into. Emma's key turned in the lock with a satisfying click, the sound echoing slightly in the empty apartment. She stepped inside, inhaling the faint scent of lemon polish and the subtle notes of the seasonal candle she'd lit that morning, precisely 30 minutes as she showered and dressed, then extinguished before leaving. The space welcomed her with stillness, everything exactly as she had left it. No surprises, no chaos, no other person's needs to navigate. This was what she wanted, she reminded herself as she slipped off her heels at the exact spot designated for them beside the door. The apartment spread before her in clean lines and muted tones, dove-gray walls, ivory trim, hardwood floors that gleamed with care. A spacious one-bedroom, on the 4th floor of a renovated Victorian, it offered high ceilings, generous windows, and a view of the town that had initially justified the somewhat steep rent. Emma had decorated minimally, but with purpose. A charcoal sectional positioned precisely at the optimal angle to both the television and the windows, a glass coffee table that never bore water rings or clutter, 2 articulated reading lamps that cast perfect pools of light for evening case reviews. She moved through her evening routine with practiced efficiency. Her coat, a tailored wool blend in navy, found its place in the closet, centered on its wooden hanger with sleeves smooth and collar straight. Keys and wallet settled into the small ceramic dish by the door. A handmade piece purchased from a local artisan, its organic form the only item permitted to deviate from the apartment's geometric precision. Emma aligned the wallet's edge parallel to the dish's rim, a small adjustment that provided disproportionate satisfaction. In the kitchen, Emma selected a bottle of Cabernet, different from the one she'd shared with Margot, but similar enough to create a sense of continuity. She poured precisely 1 glass, the dark liquid rising exactly to the widest point of the bowl. A ritual with rules she never articulated but followed faithfully: 1 glass on weeknights, no more than 2 on weekends, always in the proper stemware that emphasized the wine's character. The antique grandfather clock in the corner marked the hour with resonant chimes. It was the only piece she'd kept from her grandmother's house, a stately presence that had frightened her as a child with its imposing height and mysterious ticking innards. Now its steady heartbeat provided comfort, a reminder of continuity in a world of constant change. Emma ran her fingers along its polished wood as she passed, a rare gesture of affection toward an inanimate object. She settled onto the couch with her wine and the case file she'd brought home, notes on the anxious client whose progress had been the highlight of her day. But instead of opening the folder, Emma found herself staring at the empty cushion beside her. The sectional could comfortably seat 4, yet in the 3 years she'd owned it, rarely had more than one other person occupied its pristine surface. Margot, occasionally. Theo, before their relationship had faded into polite distance. The case file remained closed on her lap as her eyes traced the apartment's careful arrangement. Everything in its place. Everything serving a purpose. No excess, no disorder. She had created this space as she had created her professional life, with intention, with boundaries, with a careful eye toward what was necessary and what was not. Margot's words from dinner returned, unwelcome. You can't hide behind your clients forever. Emma set down her glass with more force than intended. She wasn't hiding. She was being prudent. Responsible. Her clients deserved her full emotional capacity, not whatever scraps might be left after navigating the messiness of romantic entanglements. Theo had never understood that. His frustration at her cancelled dates when sessions ran long, his thinly veiled impatience when she declined to discuss her clients even in vague terms. The wine tasted suddenly bitter. Emma stood, drawn to the windows overlooking the town. Below, streets curved between historic buildings, lights twinkling like earthbound stars. People moved between pools of streetlight, couples with hands linked, friends in animated conversation, lone figures with destinations that mattered to someone. From this height, their purposes seemed both significant and insignificant simultaneously. Her reflection stared back from the glass, composed features, the slight furrow between brows that had deepened over recent years, hair still neatly secured despite the day's length. Behind her reflection, the empty apartment stretched like a statement she couldn't quite interpret. Emma raised her hand, fingers brushing the cool glass as though she might reach through it into the world below. The gesture felt foreign to her, impulsive without clear purpose, and she withdrew quickly, turning back to the controlled environment she had created. A picture frame on the bookshelf caught her attention, slightly askew by perhaps 2 degrees. She crossed the room and adjusted it with precise fingers, though no one but her would have noticed its imperfection. The photo inside showed Emma at her graduation from the doctoral program, flanked by beaming parents. All 3 faces smiled with appropriate pleasure, proper distance maintained even in celebration. In the bathroom, Emma removed her makeup with thorough strokes, the cotton pad coming away with the day's professional mask. She brushed her teeth for exactly 2 minutes, as recommended by dental professionals. Her nighttime moisturizer was applied in upward motions, fighting gravity's inevitable claim. The mirror reflected efficiency in all things. The bedroom waited, dominated by a queen-sized bed dressed in crisp white linens. Emma changed into silk pajamas the color of sage leaves, folding her day clothes with hospital corners before placing them in the hamper. She set her alarm for 6 a.m., never 5:59 or 6:01, a precision that extended to even her unconscious hours. As she slipped between the cool sheets, Emma performed her nightly smoothing ritual, her hand running across the empty half of the bed, erasing wrinkles that weren't there. The left side of the bed remained pristine, unmarked by use, a space preserved for someone who never arrived. The bedside lamp clicked off, plunging the room into darkness, relieved only by the faint glow of streetlights filtering through custom blinds. In this darkness, with no one to observe, Emma allowed her hand to rest momentarily on the empty pillow beside her own. The gesture held no practical purpose, no therapeutic benefit, no measurable outcome, everything her waking self valued. The clock ticked in the living room, its mechanism counting moments with relentless precision. Emma listened to its rhythm, syncing her breathing to its steady beat. Control returning. Order maintained. She curled onto her side, facing away from the empty half of the bed, and closed her eyes against the shadows that suggested shapes where there were none. In the silent apartment, everything remained in its proper place, including Emma herself, contained, composed, and carefully walled away from the messy, unpredictable currents of connection that flowed through the town below her window. This was what she had chosen, what she had built with careful intention. This was enough, she told herself as sleep approached. It had to be enough.